Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Laboratory Podcast, where we talk all things business, coffee, technology, marketing, branding, and whatever we find interesting at this current point in time. What we find interesting right now, I think, is coffee, and we've got David Walstra here. You're the, as far as I've got this, I hope I've got this right. You're the founder, director, CEO, whatever you want to call it, of both Seam Coffee and Third Space. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Cool. Okay. I've been a big fan of his for many years. You probably didn't know. I technically started the laboratory way back when, here at Seam and another coffee, or at Third Space and another coffee shop down the road, sitting with my laptop because I couldn't afford to pay for Wi-Fi at home. So I'd come and sit here and have like one coffee and work for a couple of hours. So it's actually pretty cool for me to come and sit and speak to someone who I respected and looked up to. So yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much.
Sick. So we've been fans of Seam Coffee and obviously of your space, Third Space, for quite a while, and we're introduced to Seam Coffee by this space, which is conveniently located for a lot of us here, by the way, in Fourways, Sandton, and Johannesburg, pretty much. Yeah. Have you always been in the coffee game? What were you doing beforehand? Tell us a little about who you are, where were you before, what brought you to where you are today? What's your story?
Cheers, thanks very much. So I, for my sins, spent 16 years in the security industry. Okay. 11 of that was in my own business. And it was great to a point, and then it became absolute hell.
Okay.
Security's like that. So during that time, there was a lot of spending in the industry in terms of technology and what was happening, and guys trying to find ways in which to make savings, but also ensure that risk aversion was in place. So a lot of technology came on into the fore, and that was in places like Asia. So you had to go to Taipei or to Hong Kong or to even Bangkok or Singapore to see where that technology, what was happening on the scene. Mm-hmm. And by going there, I had a lot of spare time on my hands, and I started frequenting coffee shops at a time when our coffee culture hadn't taken hold yet. And
in Asia or in SA?
In SA.
Okay.
I think back in those days, I think the best that I had was a Vita black card, and you'd go in with that, like, wow, and the guys would shout your name, and the culture just started, but it hadn't really developed yet. So it was in those coffee shops that I saw what coffee could be by people who had an inherent sense for service. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this is it. The next move is selling the business and getting involved in coffee. So that's how it started.
Okay. And that was how many years ago that you started frequenting those coffee shops in Asia?
My word. So that was probably could be 10 years ago.
Okay.
Obviously Seam Coffee and Third Space is 5 or 6 years old, but even before that, I started the process of doing the research and falling in love with coffee.
Okay. Run us through, obviously we try to encourage people to develop an entrepreneurial spirit and take action, build their own business of some sort. Run us through how you got from seeing that coffee, as you mentioned, service was the thing that really caught your attention, and where you're now. How did Third Space and Seam come to be in a practical sense?
All right. So Seam came after Third Space, in fact. So Third Space is first space is your home, second space is where you go to work, third space is where you go to build community. So I own the building that we're in, and I thought, let's have a look at something different. And again, it was seeing what was happening in Asia and saying, let's put this into a co-working environment. Mm-hmm. So that's how it was built. But obviously, the roasting side was always what it was meant to be. But owning the building meant I could do something a little bit different. I didn't have rent to pay other than to myself, so let's go for it. And I think even before Seam and Third Space came on, I started saying, all right, now I know how coffee's made. I know what it can look like in the front. What happens at the back? Mm-hmm. So I started visiting coffee farms in Burundi and Rwanda and understanding how coffee was produced. And it was at that stage that the biggest lights came on for me. Seeing that coffee communities can be in abject poverty if nobody really cares, to coffee communities that can slowly start to build a livelihood, slowly start to build their own community if somebody actually cared enough to ensure that the coffee was processed properly and that somebody paid a good price for that coffee.
The end users are all enjoying it when the producers are suffering, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. So just on that, recently the coffee price has doubled. We always, for the last 4 or 5 years before that, we were always buying coffee above the cost of production. But now it's shot through the roof, and this is brilliant because that means that a whole lot of people who are under the line can now ensure that they have got a livelihood and over the line. But still, as a traded commodity, it is still aiding farmers back into poverty.
Okay.
And that was the premise that we built Seam Coffee on, is to always ensure that we pay above the cost of production.
Okay. So I'm just trying to build a good perspective for anyone that's listening of how this all started. So you had the space, or acquired the space, the building. You started Third Space as a coffee shop / co-working space. Was it already intended to be a co-working space at the beginning, or was it more focused on just being purely a coffee shop?
Well, it was a coffee shop initially, and then we had the space, and then people were talking about kind of co-working, what was happening, and we thought, wait a minute, this is a great opportunity for us to build a community around it. So it kind of morphed into that, but we had an inkling that that's what it can be.
Okay, and then you started roasting your own coffee thereafter. So it was coffee shop, co-working space, and then starting to get into the roasting and sourcing.
So the roasting and sourcing was from day one.
Okay.
But Seam Coffee as a brand took a little bit of time, probably about a year or so, and then we actually split that off and started roasting underneath the brand, which is Seam Coffee.
Okay. It's quite interesting that you say that there was chatter about co-working back then. And I remember you had I won't mention any of the brand names or whatever in the area, but we all know who they are, sure. And they started building these co-working spaces for businesses of different sizes, but mainly focused on the entrepreneur, the smaller kind of guy. COVID completely changed the way all of us work, and it was a very interesting time for a lot of us. Some had really good experiences, some had really bad experiences. Needless to say, it'll be a time in our lives that all of us will remember, whether in our families or in our businesses, etc. How had COVID changed the business model as it was back then, or where you thought you were going to take the business to where you think you're going to take the business now post-COVID?
All right, so that's very interesting. So the intention for the building was always to turn it into a full roastery. We had extra space, so we thought we would develop the co-working. It's now got to a stage where the community that's built up around Third Space is so huge that the business of coffee on our Seam Coffee side, we're actually having to move premises to its own warehouse, even though this was meant to be the warehouse. So interesting how COVID has changed that, because I think if I were ever to change this into purely a roastery, I think we'd have a riot. There is such a good community that's built up.
Of people that are visiting the store, or people buying beans, or
people that are every day, people that come once a week, people that come on weekends. It's still a community. So we got a saying that coffee is community, and this is what we've seen built up. So that's one of the things that have changed in the business. So we still purely focus on ethical and sustainable coffee. In fact, that's going to be our main or our core focus going forward. And then we're opening up a series of pocket shops. And I say pocket shops because I hate the word pop-up shop. It sounds like it's temporary.
Yes.
So we've already got 6 open, and by the end of the year, there'd be 10. And these will all be franchises.
Okay.
Within corporate spaces, because, unfortunately, the playing field was leveled there. Just killed everything that was in corporate. So now they're slowly starting to build up.
It's opportunity for you to come in.
Absolutely, yeah. And what we're really loving is, and I'm going to sound... like I'm dissing what happened previously, and this is not the case, but we were going around to corporates telling them about the coffee and the ethics and the sustainability, and we didn't really have anybody saying, well, this is the way we've got to go. They were more interested in, are you a brand, or aren't you, or what can you do here, or can you deliver? That was really, and it was almost a bit disheartening. But now, for the first time, we're seeing people asking the questions. Where does the coffee come from? Is it ethical? Is it sustainable? What's happening out there? So that's exciting. So now we're getting entry into places that, in the past might not have looked at us. So we're seeing some exciting things happening in that space.
Okay. That you just keep opening me up for more questions on all of those things. It's so cool. It's I'm going to go down many rabbit holes.
Super.
I just have to pick which one I want to go down. You mentioned community just now.
Yeah.
Obviously that ties in with culture.
Yeah.
You've spent a lot of time in Asia. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and coffee culture in Europe is cool. Central Europe, Germany, Berlin, Portugal, Lisbon. Coffee culture is just, it's part of life. It's in people's blood.
Absolutely.
In South Africa, the only reference I have is perhaps Cape Town and Johannesburg. Cape Town seems to me to have quite a big coffee culture, just because you see so many cafes, roasteries and stuff all over the place in and around Cape Town City and the surrounding areas.
Yeah.
Johannesburg now as well. Where do you see the culture? So it's two questions basically. Where do you see the coffee industry going in South Africa? And I suppose Johannesburg and Cape Town are the hubs of that. Yeah. And where do you see coffee culture going in a place like Johannesburg? So maybe let's start off with the first one. Where do you think the coffee industry in South Africa is going in the future?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question in two parts. So the first part is, let's just revisit what happened in the past. So we've gone through different phases in coffee, in waves, we call them. So we've gone through the third wave, which would be craft of coffee, then on to the fourth wave, which is more the science of coffee, and now we find ourselves in the fifth wave of coffee. Fifth wave is about the business of coffee. It's about how can we replicate this at scale, how can we create valuable career paths for individuals, and how can we ensure that we're delivering something that is good, is tangible. It's like, rather than just saying we're roasting out of the backyard. So that's where we find ourselves. And it's my belief that the sixth wave, and I wouldn't call it six, but the next wave is going to be about transparency in coffee, because we've bridged the gap of that very cheap coffee now to at a much higher point. Now people are going to start asking the questions, because that gap's much smaller. So sorry, I just want to lay that down.
Cool.
Then what we're seeing happening, we saw this globally, is that, and in places like Taipei, and this was the oddest thing for me to conceive, is there would be a Starbucks that opened, and an independent coffee shop would open right next door to them. And I thought, that's crazy, because you got somebody who's got an established name, and why would you do that? And then it became apparent that because people are going to Starbucks educates their customers. They then have a look at spending time there, and they learn about coffee, and then they want to maybe graduate.
Opens the door.
And we're seeing that now in South Africa. Starbucks are opening up in the weirdest places. In fact, the most beautiful places of Muizenberg. Starbucks is opening a spot just down the road from us in a small, it's strip mall.
Yeah,
and
it's a very weird center.
Very weird center. And this is the most exciting thing for me, because what we're going to see is it's going to float everyone's boat in terms of coffee. It's almost like I felt, why didn't this happen sooner? Johannesburg, in my humble opinion, is kind of franchise heaven. And I think a lot of the landlords have seen the safe bet when it comes to coffee or restaurants or whatever, and weren't sure to give the independent guys a chance. Slowly, we're starting to see that change.
Okay.
We're seeing great groups like Plato come into the fore, awesome concept, awesome spaces, and I think we're going to start seeing that change. But if you have a look at Cape Town's all of those coffee shops are in places that not really malls or something. They're split off in places that they might have been able to get a rental from, or where the landlords have believed in the process.
Yes.
Joburg, a little bit slow on that point, but we're catching up.
Okay, that's really exciting. I hadn't thought about that whatsoever, that the bigger franchises like Starbucks, Mug and Bean, maybe Woolworths are opening the door to people.
Absolutely.
To the, how do I say, the introduction of coffee that intrigues the more discerning kind of guys to maybe look at the artisanal side of it then, so they're almost opening the door for us.
Yeah.
So I like that you view that from a positive perspective.
Yeah.
The next thing that I was going to ask you was in and around branding. Of course, we consider ourselves brand specialists in and amongst other things that we do.
Yeah.
Brand is very important. As I've always believed brand is almost like a personality of a person, of a brand, or of a business. The brand is the personality of a business. I often use this phrase, I hope I can get it right. Marketing is asking someone out on a date, and branding is the reason they said yes. And
Interesting.
I think that's stood true for a lot of the companies that we've done work for. And before I ever visited Third Space, I saw the logo was slick. I saw images of the neon lights that you used to have downstairs in
Kanji, that was in Japanese. It was Third Space in Japanese.
Oh, it looked so awesome. I mean, I didn't even know what it said, but it just looked cool. And it showed that you put effort around your brand and in a physical touch point. So we often just think that a brand is a digital touch point. It's your logo, etc. A brand is the way you might make a person feel when they engage with your business at any touch point along their customer journey.
Yeah.
And you've done a good job at that, both online and in the store. How much of your success as a business or as a company do you think is dependent on the effort that you put into building a solid brand?
So funny you said that. There is a group in Berlin called The Barn, and I only realized, and I'm not comparing our business to them at all. They're a world-class roastery, but what the head of The Barn business did is tackle every single aspect of the business himself, from social media to I think even the design of the business. Sorry.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, so the guys are... Oh, is that all right? Sorry.
Yeah, don't stress.
Sorry, there's a huge... I thought you might want to cut there. Sorry. All right. So just on that, I mean, you mentioned Berlin earlier. There's a business called The Barn. In fact, it's a world-class roastery. They've just opened up in Dubai. And this is not about me comparing to what they're doing, but it's more a story about the head of The Barn tackling every single aspect of the business himself, from social media to the logo, the design, everything. And that's kind of what I've done. I didn't only realize he did it afterwards, not something you try to mimic on, but I'm a stickler for detail. So I had to make sure that all those aspects were met. Sometimes it's to my own detriment, but I think in general, I've been able to guide the business in the direction that I felt it needed to go by tackling that. And that included the brand and how we did things.
Okay.
But for the last few years, we've been very, I wouldn't say use the word humble, but rather not like making a big thing about the brand, rather letting the coffee talk.
So more passive marketing and
absolutely,
letting people experience it instead of pushing it down their throats on social media about how amazing you are.
Absolutely, yeah. And now we are kind of we're at a bit of a crossroads, because now we need to expand our business, but we need to tell people what we do without sounding preachy.
Yes.
So now we're kind of reviewing things and seeing how best to open that up.
Okay. So if a person were to be listening to this podcast, wanting to get into coffee, they want to start their own coffee business, whether small or big, would your advice be along those lines of do a lot of the things yourself and do them to the best of your ability? What would your advice be to young people or to anyone who might be wanting to get into the coffee industry? And would you, I mean, you're in it now, but would you encourage people to get into the coffee industry? And at what part of the value chain do you think you'd encourage them to start?
So my advice has always been the same, is people saying, should I open a coffee shop? And my advice has been, don't.
Okay.
But let me clarify that for you. So people think that it's it's just an easy in and you're A4 away. We're 5 years old and we only now are getting towards a profitable position. But that's of our own doing. We kept wanting to invest. We kept wanting to build relationships, more technology, more. We got a new roaster on the way, a Loring S35 roaster. It ships from Seattle on the 18th.
If I knew what that was, I'd be like, whoa.
Okay. I'm sure a couple of the listeners might know. If you're not sure, go and have a look at it. So it's arguably one of the best roasters in terms of specialty. So we constantly plug him back in. But my advice would be, don't expect miracles immediately. You're going to have to work hard in the business. But I think, in hindsight, I would have collaborated more. I would have offloaded a lot of the things that I took personally and I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll do that. There are a lot of, with the gig economy, there's amazing things that people can do right now in offloading the social media, in offloading the marketing, in ensuring that you work on the business and not in the business. Mm-hmm. So my advice is simple. Go and find a position. Be careful of high rentals. Be careful of places that force you to stay open certain periods of time.
Okay.
Look for something that you can find where the rental is decent or even negated because they want something different in there. That's what I'd look at. I'd say be careful of high rental environments. You're going to come unstuck unless you really know what you're doing.
Okay.
So avoid that. Find places. Remember, coffee, really good coffee, it's a destination. People will find you. When we first got the space, nobody even knew that existed. People walk in there like, what have you done, pal? This is probably the dumbest idea under the sun. And I said, look, I've got to back ourselves. This is about a destination. People will find us. And so that would be my advice.
And the people have come, so well done to that. You're still standing.
Cheers, yeah.
And how have you created you say it's a destination, but I often think a destination, and I completely agree with you, because I think there's something nice about an artisanal space, whether it's a coffee shop or a restaurant or whatever it is, that isn't just there for convenience in a shopping center, and it's there because the people are there.
Sure.
It's kind of the other way around. It's so good that people want to travel, but that's only warranted if the experience is good enough.
Yeah.
How have you tried to create a customer experience that's enjoyable?
So I think right from the outset, we thought, how could we add value to what is happening there in terms of when I used to, before we started this, go into coffee shops and I'd open my laptop and the barista would give me the hairy eyeball if I was nursing a latte for longer than 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So we thought, how can we change that a little bit? So this is really where it's at. So the dwell time in our place is long, and we don't care how long you stay. But we try to make that user experience really good. We've ensured the Wi-Fi. Got 200 megs Wi-Fi, and you can surf as long as you like, and you can stay as long as you like. So, and that's why I'm warning against high rental environments, because if you get that, you must value that. That value that customer owns by continuing to come and visit you is your core. That's your bread and butter. That's what you rely on.
You'd rather spend that money elsewhere on something like good Wi-Fi, or one of the things that I've seen you guys always do is there's plug points, both European and the South African kind, with I think USB even, so that everyone has easy access. So you'd say money is better spent or better invested in something like that.
Absolutely. That's the user experience. When you sit down at the table, our tables are a lot bigger than you'd find normally. We did that on purpose. When you go to, you're designing something, they make an allocation that says 60 centimeters, that's fine for a seat. And we're like, no, I'm sure we can do it better. So we put more space in, we ensure plug points at each table. Even the seats, they look minimalist, but they're made by Pedrali in Italy, and they're ergonomically designed so you can sit on them the whole day. Little things like that add value to the user experience.
Yeah. I think a lot of the people that come here, I was one of them, are involved in a lot of, because they're all, the fact that they are here and not sitting in an office most likely means this is just an assumption that they work in some kind of, probably either marketing or technology or something like that, some forward-thinking kind of business. That makes me think a little bit about technology. How big of a role does technology in its various forms, whether it's in a machine? I mean, there we see a big screen that's attached to your roasting system. You guys have iPads instead of big point-of-sale systems. Are you into e-commerce? How big of a role does technology play in your business, and where do you think technology is going to... Do you think it'll have a bigger role for the business going forward as well?
So absolutely. I think I've got a layman's understanding of tech, and nothing like a crisis to thrust you into something, and having to almost be forced to go the e-commerce route.
Yeah.
I then even had to teach myself how to operate the Shopify platform, and purchase a theme, and next thing we know, we're trading.
Yeah.
I wish I'd done it sooner. Is the answer. But I think nothing like a crisis during COVID, and we were off delivering. We've got a platform with Africa now. Everything gets delivered. Even our wholesale clients get delivered. But in the early days, I was in my car delivering that myself.
No way.
So yeah.
So how would a person order? They just order.
So they'd order online. It'll tell us we've got an order and give us an address, and boom, we're off. Unless it was down to Cape Town, and then we'd quickly go into Courier Guy and type in the information, and we're off. So these days everything is automated with us. So we've put a bit of effort into that. As you said, our roaster, everything's software controlled now.
Okay.
Which is we've even had a roaster. He was in Burundi, and he was roasting from there on the roaster live, and he went to Melbourne, and he was roasting live from there. So, I mean, there's such amazing technology. So,
run me through that. How does that work?
So all you really need is a login. So you log into the software. As long as somebody's here to open up the top of the roaster and pop it in,
fill it,
he'd be able to control and manipulate the roast during the process, and then just ask for a drop. And that's it.
Goodness me! So he's probably sitting in another coffee shop like Third Space somewhere in Australia or wherever, roasting coffee in South Africa.
Yeah, and those are the two. In fact, the UK as well. So I mean, he roasted in Burundi, the UK, and in Melbourne at one stage on our roaster.
And how much control does he have over what's happening here?
Absolute control. So remember, a roaster, just to give you a brief thing, there's only two things you can control, which is airflow and bead and temperature. There's a lot that happens during that process, and there's 100 ways to stuff it up. But that's really what you can control. But if you've got live and you can see the profile, you can control it.
So in future, when you're hiring roasters and you're putting up the job publishing or whatever on LinkedIn, it'll say remote, you can work remotely as well.
Yeah.
Goodness,
just
that's
one
awesome.
of the jobs we can probably do remotely. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, so I think I'm really happy to know that there's, we wanted to have this podcast simply because we wanted to have you on the podcast simply because we are fascinated by so many people's different businesses, and a lot of the time the way they do things might give someone a good idea for a business in a completely different industry.
Absolutely.
I love sharing those stories. It motivates me. It motivates our entire team. Hopefully can motivate a couple listeners. So thanks for taking the time to chat with us. And I hope we'll be back in a year or two to see how much you've grown. Maybe come and have a look at the new roastery and all that kind of stuff. So well done on what you've built, and thanks for serving us good coffee.